Yashodanandana Varadanandana Yashodanandana Varadanandana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Yajaya Radha Madhava Kunjavihari Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayat. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead, Narayan, unto Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. Nasta Prayasu Bhadresu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttamashloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki. By regular attendance in the classes on the Bhagavatam and by rendering of service to the pure devotee, troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed. In loving service unto the personality of Godhead, praised with transcendental song, is established as an irrevocable fact. Om Vignani Timarandasya Gananjana Salakaya Chakshurun Mulitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurve Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. Jai, good morning. Thank you all for coming to Srimad Bhagavatam class today. We'll be going over Canto 7, Chapter 1, The Supreme Lord is Equal to Everyone, verses 13 through 32.
Text 13. Formerly, O king, when Maharaj Yudhishthira was performing the Rajasuya sacrifice, the great sage Narada, responding to his inquiry, recited historical facts showing how the Supreme Personality of Godhead is always impartial, even when killing demons. In this regard, he gave a vivid example.
O king, at the Rajasuya sacrifice, Maharaj Yudhishthir, the son of Maharaj Pandu, personally saw Shishupal merge into the body of the Supreme Lord Krishna. Therefore, struck with wonder, he inquired about the reason for this from the great sage Narada, who was seated there. While he inquired, all the sages present also heard him ask his question.
Maharaj Yudhishthira inquired, "It is very wonderful that the demon Shishupal merged into the body of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, even though extremely envious. This Sayujya Mukti is impossible to attain even for great transcendentalists. How then did the enemy of the Lord attain it?"
O great sage, we are all eager to know the cause for this mercy of the Lord. I have heard that formerly a king named Vena blasphemed the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and that all the Brahmanas consequently obliged him to go to hell Shishupal should also have been sent to hell. How then did he merge into the Lord's existence?
From the very beginning of his childhood, when he could not even speak properly, Sisupala, the most sinful son of Damagosa, began blaspheming the Lord, and he continued to be envious of Sri Krishna until death. Similarly, his brother Dhanatavakra continued the same habits.
Although the two men, Shishupala and Dantavakra, repeatedly blasphemed the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Vishnu, Krishna, the Supreme Brahman, they were quite healthy. Indeed, their tongues were not attacked by white leprosy, nor did they enter the darkest region of hellish life. We are certainly most surprised by this.
Text 20. How is it possible for Shishupala and Dantavakra, in the presence of many exalted persons, to enter very easily into the body of Krishna, whose nature is difficult to attain?
This matter is undoubtedly very wonderful. Indeed, my intelligence has become disturbed, just as the flame of a candle is disturbed by a blowing wind. O Narada Muni, you know everything. Kindly let me know the cause of this wonderful event.
Sri Sukadev Goswami said, after hearing the request of Maharaj Yudhisthira, Narada Muni, the most powerful spiritual master, who knew everything, was very pleased. Thus he replied in the presence of everyone taking part in the yajna.
The great sage Sri said, O king, blasphemy and praise, the chastisement and respect are experienced because of ignorance. The body of the conditioned soul is planned by the Lord for suffering in the material world through the agency of the external energy.
My dear king, the conditioned soul, being in the bodily conception of life, considers his body to be his self and considers everything in relationship with the body to be his. Because he has this wrong conception of life, he is subjected to dualities like praise and chastisement.
Text 25. Because of the bodily conception of life, the conditioned soul thinks that when the body is annihilated, the living being is annihilated. Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the Supreme Controller, the Super Soul of all living entities. Because he has no material body, he has no false conception of I and mine. It is therefore incorrect to think that he feels pleasure or pain when blasphemed or offered prayers. This is impossible for him. Thus, he has no enemy and no friend. When he chastises the demons, it is for their good, and when he accepts the prayers of the devotees, it is for their good. He is affected neither by prayers nor by blasphemy.
Therefore, by enmity or by devotional service, by fear, by affection or by lusty desires, by all of those or any of them, if a conditioned soul somehow or other concentrates his mind upon the Lord, the result is the same. For the Lord, because of his blissful position, is never affected by enmity or friendship.
Narad Muni continued, by devotional service one cannot achieve such intense absorption in thought of the Supreme Personality of Godhead as one can through enmity toward him. That is my opinion.
A grass worm confined in a hole of a wall by a bee always thinks of the bee in fear and enmity, and later becomes a bee simply because of such remembrance. Similarly, If the conditioned souls somehow or other think of Krishna, who is Sachidananda Vigraha, they will become free from their sins, whether thinking of him as their worshipable Lord or an enemy. Because of constantly thinking of him, they will regain their spiritual bodies.
Many persons have attained liberation simply by thinking of Krishna with great attention and giving up sinful activities. This great attention may be due to lusty desires, inimical feelings, fear, affection, or devotional service. I shall now explain how one receives Krishna's mercy simply by concentrating one's mind upon him.
My dear King Yudhishthir, the gopis by their lusty desires, Kamsa by his fear, Shishupal and other kings by envy, the Yadus by their familial relationship with Krishna, you Pandavas by your great affection for Krishna, and we the general devotees by our devotional service have obtained the mercy of Krishna.
Somehow or other, one must consider the form of Krishna very seriously. Then, by one of the 5 different processes mentioned above, one can return home, back to Godhead. Atheists like King Vena, however, being unable to think of Krishna's form in any of these 5 ways, cannot attain salvation. Therefore, one must somehow think of Krishna, whether in a friendly way or intimately.
Inimically. So that's actually our last verse we're reading for today. Before we go on to our focus verse, text 25, I wanted to kind of review what's happened in the chapter so far. So this chapter, its purpose is given in the title, The Supreme Lord is Equal to Everyone. And at the beginning of the chapter, King Parikshit is asking Sukadeva Goswami, is the Supreme Lord really equal to everyone? Sometimes it seems he's a bit partial because he sides with the demigods. And Sukadeva Goswami actually really likes this question because it gives him the opportunity to discuss the Supreme Lord. So our last couple verses we read, 31 and 32, was talking about how no matter what, we have to find a way to fix our mind on the Lord. So Sukadeva Goswami was like, excellent, an opportunity to discuss the Supreme Lord, as we do here every day. And that is factually how we regain our spiritual bodies. However, in the verses discussed today, it talks about how Narada Muni says something so interesting. He says, it's actually easier to focus on the Supreme Lord when we have enmity towards him. Right? That was like a surprising thing for Narada Muni to say. And he says this is like an easier way to regain our spiritual bodies, but we don't just want to regain our spiritual bodies. We want to have a loving relationship with Krishna, to have pure devotional service. And the way to do that is not through enmity. Although in Krishna Lila, he does sometimes enjoy a little bit of anger in the relationship. So we can go on to our focus verse today and read text 25 together. Yani pado bimano yam tadvadat praninam vada Tathanayasya kaivalyad Abhimano kilatmanaha Parasyatama katurhi Himsakinsya kalpyate Nanivado bimano yam Tadvadat praninam vada Tathanayasya kalvaryad Avimano kilatmanaha Parasyatama katurhi Himsakenasya kalpyate Yanivado vimano yam Tadvadat praninam vadaha. Tathanayasya kaivalyad. Abhimano kilatmanaha. Parasyatama katurhi. Himsakena kalpyate. Please repeat. Tathanayasya kaivalyad. Kilatmana. Parasyatama katurhi. Sakinasya kalpyate. Yanibado bimanoyam. Tadvadat praninam vadaha. Tanayasya kaivalyad. Abhimano kilatmanaha. Parasyatama chaturhi. Sakenasya kalpate. Anibado bimanoyam. Yadvadat praninam vadaha. Anayasya kaivalyad. Abhimano kilatmanaha. Parasyatama katurhi. Sakenasya kalpate. Word for word together. Yat, in which. Nibaraha, bound. Abhimanaha, false conception. I am this, tat, of that body. Vadhat, from the annihilation. Praninam, of the living beings. Vada, annihilation. Tatha, similarly. Na, not. Yasya, of whom. Kavalyat, because of being absolute, one without a second. Abhinana, false conception. Akila Atmana, of the supersoul of all living entities. Parasya, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Dhamma, Kartu, Supreme Controller. He certainly. Hamsa, harm. Hena, how. Asya, his. Kapyate, is performed. Translation together as well. Because of the bodily conception of life, the conditioned soul thinks that when the body is annihilated, the living being is annihilated. Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the Supreme Controller, the super soul of all living entities. Because he has no material body, he has no false conception of I and mine. It's correct to think he feels pleasure or pain when he blasphemed or offered prayers. This is impossible for him. Thus he has no enemy and no friend. When he says the demons, it is for their own good. And when he accepts the prayers of the devotees, it is for their good. It's affected neither by prayers nor by blasphemy. Would anyone like to read the purport?
Because of being covered by material bodies, the conditioned souls, including even greatly learned scholars and falsely educated professors, all think that as soon as the body is finished, everything is finished. This is due to their bodily conception of life. Krishna has no such bodily conception, nor is his body different from his self. Therefore, since Krishna has no material conception of life, how can he be affected by material prayers by material prayers and accusations? Krishna's body is described herewith as Kaivalya, non-different from himself. Since everyone has a material bodily conception of life, if Krishna had such a conception, what would be the difference between Krishna and the conditioned soul? Krishna's instructions in Bhagavad Gita are accepted as final because he does not possess a material body. As soon as one has a material body, he has 4 deficiencies. But since Krishna does not possess a material body, he has no deficiencies. He is always spiritually conscious and blissful. Ishvara Paramaha Krishna Satchidananda Vigraha. His form is eternal, blissful knowledge. Satchidananda Vigraha. Ananda Chinmaya Ras and Kaivalya are the same. I want to repeat that last line. His form is eternal, blissful knowledge. Satchidananda Vigraha, Ananda Chinmaya Ras, and Kaivalya are the same. Krishna can expand himself as Paramatma in the core of everyone's heart. In Bhagavad Gita 13.3, this is confirmed. Chetragyam chapimam vidhi sarva shetreshu. Bharata, the Lord, is the Paramatma, the Atma, or super self of all individual souls. Therefore, it must be naturally concluded that he has no defective bodily conceptions. Although situated in everyone's body, he has no bodily conception of life. He is always free from such conceptions, and thus he cannot be affected by anything in relation to the material body of the jiva. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Tanaham dishtata kraran samsasheshu naradhamam Chipani ashram ashubhan asurij eva yonishu. Those who are envious and mischievous, who are the lowest amongst men, are cast by me into the ocean of material existence, into various demoniac species of life. Whenever the Lord punishes persons like demons, however, such a punishment is meant for the good of the conditioned soul. The conditioned soul, being envious of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, may accuse him, saying, Krishna is bad, Krishna is a thief, and so on. But Krishna, being kind to all living entities, does not consider such accusations. Instead, he takes into account of the conditioned souls chanting, Krishna, Krishna, so many times. He sometimes punishes such demons for one life by putting them in a lower species. But then, when they have stopped accusing him, they are liberated in the next life because of chanting Krishna's names constantly. Blaspheming the Supreme Lord or his devotee is not at all good for the conditioned soul. But Krishna, being very kind, punishes the conditioned soul in one life for such sinful activities and then takes him back home, back to Godhead. The vivid example for this is Vritrasura, who was formerly Chitraketu Maharaj, a great devotee. Because he derided Lord Shiva, the foremost of all devotees, he had to accept the body of a demon called Rita. But then he was taken back to Godhead. Thus, when Krishna punishes a demon or a conditioned soul, he stops that soul's habit of blaspheming him. And when the soul becomes completely pure, the Lord takes him back to Godhead. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Jai, Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu, for reading. Oh, Haribol. Yeah, very nice. So at the beginning of this chapter, the question is, why does Krishna appear to side with the demigods? We're all conditioned souls. And so why is Krishna showing this, so it seems, partiality? This is explained really quickly. I'd like to review. I find it very relevant to diving into our main themes today of impartiality and punishment. So it says that when Krishna created this world, the material world, he also created the time factor for the living entity to live in and experience the material world and learn our lessons as we were cast into this world for being envious. And so Krishna therefore sides with the demigods because in order to really take advantage of this time factor, you must be in the mode of goodness. And the demigods are most closely, not all the way, but most closely allied with the mode of goodness. So by Krishna by Vishnu, siding with the demigods and supporting them in their endeavors. He therefore supports all of material life and all of our growing closer to him, should we choose to take that path. So, one thing I'd like to discuss today is, what is this envy that brings us into the material world in the first place, and how can we overcome it? So envy is really not the same as jealousy. It's we want to have what a person has and take it over for them. So the root of us coming into this material existence is we want to be Krishna, and not just be Krishna, but have no more Krishna. Instead, it's us. We are the center, right? There can't be two centers. There's just one. So that is that root of envy is taking over. But factually, this is not good for anything in existence if we, in a conditioned, envious way, were to take the center. Because Krishna is the center and the most perfect, it says that he is so impartial because he is not overcome by these modes of material nature. So this is rooted in, as this verse highlights, this conception of I and mine, this false bodily concept. So because we have these false bodily concept, I and mine, we take things personally, you know? If someone says like, oh, you've done this, we feel something in our hearts like, oh, I did this. Oh, this was my bad thing I did. Or, oh, this is mine, why are you insulting it? And so there's these misconceptions. But Krishna doesn't have this false ego identity. He factually just is. And so when somebody praises Krishna, or when somebody is upset with Krishna, he sees it for what it is. He sees it for this illusion, this false concept. And we can take the same thing, that factually nothing is personal. There's nothing personal. If somebody is upset with us, or if somebody is happy with us, it has 100% of the time everything to do with them. In ancient Toltec wisdom as well, there are these 4 agreements. Have some of you guys heard of this, the 4 agreements? One of them is never to take anything personally, because as the Toltec wisdom describes, this gets you closer to pure love. Because this is seeing things as they are, that everyone is kind of caught up in their own web. And so if something is like offending someone, it's usually just pressing on a pain point that is already there, some pain point on the emotional body. But Krishna has no pain points. He has no pleasure points. He simply just is in relation to the material world and above it all. And that's why he is in the perfect condition to be the Supreme Lord, to navigate our lives for us and kind of show us the way back to him, because he has this impartiality. So although it can look like sometimes Krishna is partial, factually it's not the case. He is simply doing what is best for everyone, following what he wants as well. For us also, because we have these false conception of I and mine, we experience the world in forms of duality, these good and evil. They talk about this in the Bhagavad Gita. In the purport, some of the verses talks about today that part of the reason that we take the Bhagavad Gita in such fact is because of Krishna's perfect position. So he explains this, that when we're in the imperfect position, that's when we come into these dualities of good and evil, bad and good. So I wanted to raise a question later, something to think about, which we can, when we get into discussion a little more, we can talk about if anyone has a reflection. How can we encourage ourselves mentally through our own effort to come into this more equiposed position? What in our life can we look at and see, oh, I'm looking at this as a good thing or a bad thing? How can I instead bring it to more of an equal position, or even better, a transcendent one or a spiritual one in relation to Krishna? So how can we become more equiposed in our life? What are we looking at, especially as conditioned entities? I've seen studies where it's something like 80% of our thoughts that they've recorded are negative. That's our conditioned way, is to look things as very negative. So one of the most rewarding things I've found is if I catch myself being a little negative in my mind or my heart, how can I bring this to more of a neutral platform? It's also our tendency to bounce back the other way, switch to the other side. If we're very attached to something, we want to try to repulse ourselves by it. Or if we're very repulsed by something, we're thinking it's bad, we want to try to like really love it instead. Oftentimes though, an equal perspective or simply surrendering to Krishna is a lot more beneficial. Because then if we take something that we find very negative and then we switch it to the positive, sometimes that can also lead to an unnecessary attachment. So that's something to reflect on today. Now, as we get into more of that equipoise position, we can also more easily understand Krishna, as well as when we come to more of the mode of goodness, taking advantage of this time factor. See, Krishna has given us, there's this opportunity with the time factor. Sometimes time, we've all experienced this, it feels like time is running out, time can cause such anxieties, but it's there for a purpose, a reason. He has it so that we can experience the world through the lens of time and therefore learn lessons to become closer to him. Right? We heard from Srila Prabhupada, he has this story about right before he even opened a temple, he already knew he had opened 108 before he died. And he had this perfection of knowing that all time is now, and he already had these things. Now, we might not be able to see it that way, or sometimes we might get glimpses, but I might not always be able to see it this way, and that's because this time factor, this lens, allows us to look at our life moment to moment and really analyze it and dig deep into our heart to develop our plant of bhakti, to develop our relationship to Krishna, and also to understand Krishna through the lens of time, which he has given us. So once we understand this, also in chapter 13, the Bhagavad Gita, it talks about that. Through understanding this, we attain liberation. In the chapter today, it talks about doing everything we can to focus on Krishna. Now in Bhagavad Gita 4:9, it says, Janma karma cha me divyam evam yo veti tatvataha tyaktva deham punar janma naiti mam eti so Arjuna. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving this body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. So that is really our goal and our purpose, is to be with Krishna in a loving relationship. The verse talks today, especially the purport, about the concept of punishment. Now, normally when we think of punishment, we think about what we've experienced in our life, especially when we're younger. That's when we really get a lot of hands-on punishment. We're even often told by our parents, you're being punished for this. And so we can think of this idea of punishment as this very negative thing, often because when our parents were punishing us, it was often to benefit them, like their child was being a rascal and being very much irritating to them, so they kind of encourage them in a way through punishment. Oftentimes there's also some real love there. We want our children to do well, to thrive and flourish, and to be good people in society. But often it's colored with the fact that, oh, this habit of yours, child, is is really quite in the way of my pleasure and enjoyment, or my ability to do what I want to do, or do some work to provide for the family. There's because of this material conditioning. But with Krishna, because he is separate from this material illusion, he has no concept of I and mine. He's not experiencing pain or pleasure because of our actions. So when he is dishing out punishment, as you call it, it's from a place of pure love. It's not from a place of, oh, you're doing bad by me, or you're inconveniencing me. So I prefer to see these punishments as instead opportunities. So it's kind of like opportunity knocks there, and we can choose to see these things. I hear it referred to a lot in the text and as tests and punishments. But for me, I see it as encouragement and opportunities, simply because from the position of, if we imagine Krishna as separate and not experiencing pain or pleasure, but simply trying to bring us closer to him in a very loving way, that's factually what they are instead. And also factually, they sometimes are to punish us, but it's not from a place of inimicality. Yeah. So I would like to open up for discussion today, reminding y'all of the question of how can we flip our mindset a little bit more? Anything we see as negative to become more neutral, or anything we're maybe seeing as a little too positive to come to more neutrality as well. Or just any questions from the talk today. Yeah, Trista. On the table.
Hare Krishna, thank you for the nice class. I appreciated this point that Krishna doesn't act out of envy. He's not an envious God who puts people to hell because we hurt his feelings by not serving him. I had a question that, so Krishna, if someone blasphemes him, he doesn't really care. He's like, they're saying Krishna at least, I will elevate them. And if someone prays to him, he's also like indifferent. And so this quality is being praised. I'm wondering, as conditioned souls, as ourselves, I've seen examples of devotees where if someone blasphemes us, we try to say, oh, I am the most fallen, and he's right, and, we give it more merit. We don't say, oh, that doesn't matter. Oh, that's just their illusion talking. I'm not going to take it personally, but it's a little conflicting for me because sometimes I see the acharyas do seem to take it quite personally. That, oh, I'm very fallen. Like that one devotee was framed for worshipping Durga by another devotee, and when they found the paraphernalia, he said, oh yes, this is me. I've done it. So how can we understand this? How can we balance these two perspectives?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Our acharyas are our example in the title. So I definitely cannot claim to understand them completely, but I suppose a reflection on it is that they do have this higher understanding, and then they also come into this world and are conditioned souls as we are. So this quality of I and mine, to claim things as ours, as a quality of ours, is factually not correct. This concept of I and mine is part of the illusory energy. However, while we're in this world, we have to kind of act within that illusion. So the acharyas are showing us how to act properly. And so that's kind of what I take it as. Is there any other reflections from the audience? Basically, no worries. My understanding of the question is, why do our acharyas take things on as their own, blaspheme things, like the example he gave of somebody framing an acharya of being a worshipper of Durga, and he said, yes, this is me. And they take it as more of like, oh, I am so fallen. What you're saying is correct. Why do they say that instead of recognizing, oh, the person is doing this because of their own illusion, and it's not actually personal to me? So that's kind of the question.
Acharyas appear throughout human history in all different shapes and forms. Krishna sends his representatives to preach according to perhaps to time, place, and circumstance. Sometimes he's revealing the highest truth. Sometimes the ABCs of just not being an animal.
Yeah, not being an animal. Also, I'm realizing as I was explaining this question too, that the option in while we're observing from a material body is either it's mine or it's not mine, but it still either way has to do with this concept of I, me, and mine, this bodily concept. So saying this is not mine, this is you, is kind of like casting blame onto someone else. So I believe our acharya's example is saying it's better to take a humble position and say this is me and inspect ourselves deeply and learn from it, rather than to cast it off and say, oh, that has nothing to do with me, because that's not really good for our ego either. Either way, we're playing from that false perspective of I, me, and mine by saying not or yes. So yeah, their example is very nice. Yes, Prabhu?
This a very nice question. I also try to comprehend it to some degree. And Dina Bandhu this weekend, he said something that really hit me in this way, because we hear that the acharyas are showing us by example what our attitude should be. and he was talking about Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, and they were going to drag his guru's body through the courtyard, because he asked, when I leave my body, you drag my body through all the village so people can see this rascal. And they were going to do it. And Bhakti Siddhanta said, no, you guys are fools. He said that simply to smash your pride. And when he said that, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is the Acharya is saying these things to smash our pride. How big do we think we are? And yet they're saying it with this sincerity that they are the lowest. And so it just, it's a real teachable moment.
That's beautiful,
like this.
Prabhu. Yes. That also is reconcent of like the verse Trinadapi Sunichina Tarorapi Sahishnina. So like why do our acharyas take this blame onto themselves? It's because any opportunity to, as you said, slash our pride is an opportunity to become closer to Krishna. Because when we are in that lowest state, we're able to chant the Maha Mantra constantly, and that is our whole goal in this Yukta Vairagya age of chanting the holy names. So as long as we can take an opportunity to be humble, it's always better to do that, no matter what others think of us, because actually wanting to enjoy and control the opinions of others, to be positive onto ourselves is an element of sense gratification. But rather we can always take that slashing of pride that I am lower, then we can focus on what really matters, this form of Krishna, and developing and remembering our loving relationship with him. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, thank you for the nice class. If we don't mind changing the topic, I was thinking about the question that you had asked for reflections on regarding how can we be more equipoised instead of looking at things that happen in our life as good versus bad, and instead just being more equipoised. I was reflecting on a story about Srila Prabhupada, and I was thinking the answer to your question might be if we really try to not see ourselves as the doer. Because I can certainly speak for myself when I get good, feedback on something, or I receive something that I perceive to be good, I think there's this natural tendency to believe I deserve it. But when something I didn't want to happens, that's bad because I didn't choose it. And so I was thinking I heard a disciple of Prabhupada share this. It's in a documentary. He said that he and a bunch of other disciples were in the room with Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada looked at them, and with tears in his eyes, he said, "I'm not fit to be your leader." And he got choked up, and he said, "You are all here because of your previous connection to Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement. I'm not fit to be your leader." And the disciple said it took him years to really understand that moment, but the conclusion he came to is Prabhupada had such deep humility. He didn't see himself as the doer. He didn't believe that somehow he had brought them in, he had attracted them. It was given to him by Krishna because he's not the doer. So anyway, that's where my mind went.
Yes, that's a really great point. I appreciate it.
Hare Krishna. I was thinking about Dishidamna Prabhu's question. So I just remembered, this was long back when I was in Mumbai. So I was traveling with one of my senior guard brothers, and he pointed out on the train, there was a kind of a drunkard guy. He was sitting next to a beautiful woman, and he appeared to have been dozing off. And then he saw there was another monk, not ISKCON monk, another monk, who, as soon as another lady came and sat next to him, he immediately got up. So he brought out one wonderful point in that situation. He said, because I asked him, look at this guy, he seems to be, the drunkard guy pointed out, he seems to be totally detached. And externally, he's like us, he's a monk, but he's thinking, he's carrying the burden on his head. Why he should be thinking? So the senior god brother brought out a wonderful theme. He said, as you advance in Krishna consciousness, there are different layers. As you keep crossing over those layers, you become more and more sensitive. That guy apparently the drunkard, he was not affected, sitting next to the beautiful lady. He is desensitized totally because he's been totally into heavy sense gratification. And then he said, just like the meat eaters, for them, it's a normal thing. But you see little more advancement. Somebody who's a neophyte, so to say, coming into ISKCON, he comes to know about not eating onions, garlics, and occasionally that person happens to eat, then there is a guilt coming. And then as you advance further, you start following, observing Ekadashi Vrata, and then the same person, when he overeats, indulges into overeating, although it is Ekadashi food, that person becomes more sensitive that why did I eat so much? So as you advance more and more and more, you become more and more refined, and you start introspecting and you start thinking of even that tinge of fault, that is magnified. But the striking point here is the advanced devotees, they never develop the inferiority complex, and their devotional service is not affected. They look at that as an opportunity to intensify their surrender and devotional service, taking shelter of Krishna. That's what I
appreciate that. So you're saying basically like, for me, I see that as two sides. There's blame, shame, and complain doesn't really help anyone. Even if we're blaming or shaming or complaining about our own actions, because that reinforces this idea of I, me, and mine, or that we are the doer. So blaming ourselves even. And that's often an activity of the mind. However, lamentation is also purification. So if we allow ourselves to feel these feelings of lamentation about actions we're observing, then we focus our mind instead on Krishna and our desire to become closer to Krishna, that is much more beneficial than trying to, hammer ourselves down sometimes, because that lamentation will purify us either way. So, nice point. Is that a correct understanding of your point, or?
The pure devotees, apparently, when Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami says, I'm a worm in the stool,
Yeah.
So it is not external. When he saying that, he's not showing off that how humble I am, or it's not that they are going into depression. Such great souls, they are probably looking into in their past lives, because from Krishna comes the remembrance, and even the small tinge of fault or some wrongdoings, they think, I'm so fallen. But that is not stopping them from taking shelter. That is not putting them into depression. They take more and more intense shelter.
So you're saying it's not like self-deprecation to where they're thinking less of themselves, in like a way where they're becoming then depressed, and then that can be very dangerous, because if we feel like we don't deserve love, if we're so down and hard on ourselves, we end up turning away from Krishna, and that is like the opposite of what we're meant to do, and that's definitely not helping us in any situation or making things better. So your clarification is that our acharyas are taking this humble position because it's factual, not in a way of like depression or deprecation. One of my favorite sayings about humility is not to think less of yourself, but to think of yourself less. So instead they say, oh, I am so fallen. They're feeling that lamentation, which is purifying them, and they're turning towards Krishna. So to always be doing that. And if we're thinking of ourselves so much in this negative way, we're becoming depressed, we should try to be properly humble. Yes, Prabhu?
I was just going to, perhaps it's condense this concept of being depressed into a sutra, in that it is embarrassing for the eternal spirit soul to be in a conditioned material body. And that simple realization can cause a vast amount of existential malaise. But if we just always remember that, as Prabhupada says, due to its association with matter since time immemorial, our consciousness is now polluted by the material atmosphere. So my own source of depression sometimes is hinged on that concept of just being embarrassed to be in a material body. That was a profound realization from a very young age.
Jai, very nice.
Hope that helped.
It's one of my favorite quotes, actually, is like, where the living entity is embarrassed by the material energy. And it's always very humbling. I like to remember also that the highest state we can reach at in the material world is the lowest baseline of those that live in the spiritual world. So there's nothing to be proud of in this world at any point. Not only are we not the doer, but any sort of spiritual advancement we can have is just returning to our soul's natural state. And it's actually the lowest of the low in the spiritual world, which is our factual reality. So yeah, nothing to be proud of. Always good to, as Mandri Gopika said, take that, if we're feeling proud of something, remember that point of, we're trying to get to the bare minimum of something, of what is the standard to be in the spiritual world. The very, very bare minimum. Then also we can remember that we're the non-doer, and so if we're ever feeling pride of our activities, we can just turn that back to Krishna. Oh, Krishna arranged this so nicely. And if we're ever feeling too negative about our life circumstances, we can always turn to gratitude and be grateful for this opportunity to serve in some way, to grow in some way, to even lament our condition in some way, because that lamentation is purification and can lead us to Krishna. So gratitude can always save the day, I say. Any last questions? Yes.
So how are we to understand mischievous in this context? Because mischievous always seems like a, little nice, little mischievous.
Yeah, so that's part of when we're in that material identification, we experience dualities. So we see the good side and the bad side of mischievous, but actually mischievous in itself is not a good or bad thing. That's just observing from dualities. So in this context, mischievous is like they want to scheme to get something that's not theirs. They're wanting to scheme to steal. So they're being mischievous in a way to harm others. Which, as when we see from this bodily concept of I and mine, is like bad. Yeah. So, does anyone have another understanding of mischievous as well, or yeah?
Yeah, just that I know from a Western perspective, to say, "Oh, you rascal," is like, it's a very light thing. Like, you called children rascals. But from what I understand, an Indian perspective, rascal is a very heavy term. Like, if you call someone a rascal in India, it's a very different thing. Or when Srila Prabhupada would say rascals, he didn't mean like, oh, you little naughty child. He's like, you're a rascal, you're deceiving people and bringing people to hell. So his use of rascal or mischievous is a little more heavy than we might think as a Westerner.
Yeah, it's misleading. So that mischievous, it isn't like Krishna's mischievous where he's like kind of cheeky and playful and he's having fun and he's in this very loving mood. It's the mischievous of trying to harm others and taking actually pleasure and joy in which is like in this dark illusory energy of taking pleasure and joy in other people's suffering, and scheming to in fact cause that suffering. So yeah, it's a very negative view of mischievous. Yes. Yeah, jeez. I appreciate my spiritual master one time said that none of us should be calling people rascals, because when Prabhupada said it, he was saying it in a loving way to illuminate the truth. He was always looking to illuminate the truth from a pure way. But if we're saying it, we're trying to say it in a way that we're better than others. Oh, you're a rascal, so I am good. And like things like that. It's always to try to make ourselves better. And factually, a lot of the times when we don't like someone, we feel some enmity towards someone, it's because we're trying to make ourselves feel better. We see some light in that other person, that or this quality that we're envious of, and so then we feel this enmity towards them. So I remember I always really appreciate my spiritual master's instruction of we should never feel any enmity towards a devotee, because that's always leading us down the wrong path. It's always better to take a humble position and remain grateful and always look towards someone's good qualities. There's a sign hanging in my spiritual master's temple that says the Vaikuntha attitude is always to be appreciating one's service, and we can always remember that Maharaj Yudhisthira was a proper ruler because he could see something in everyone else that made them better and more qualified to rule than he was. So, Jai. Thank you everyone for coming today. Hare Krishna. Srimad Bhagavatam ki Jai.